So, welcome to Watchman Privacy. Samourai Wallet, the two gentlemen who run the Samourai Wallet have been arrested. We're going to get into the details here in a moment, but they've been arrested for basically conspiracy to commit money laundering and to run an unlicensed money transmitter. We're going to talk about why that's nonsensical and get into the details here with two of my guests, Seth for Privacy and BitcoinQnA. They're on top of all this stuff, so they're going to help us to dissect it. Before we do, I just want to give a statement about the situation. So I want to say first that the Samourai Wallet guys are true Americans. They're fantastic advocates of free and open source software and privacy and Bitcoin and even Monero. They're true patriots. What was done to them was evil. It's clear to anyone who even sees a headline that they're being attacked not because they did something wrong, but because people in power are trying to send a message. Let me be clear about something. The technologies of Bitcoin and privacy tools like Whirlpool, which help to make Bitcoin more useful, are the essence of freedom. They're distinct products of the true vision of America. They accord with the most important laws in the United States, which is the Bill of Rights. And the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy, has been actuated by the Samourai Wallet team creating their software. The founding fathers and the other true Americans across history would celebrate what Samourai Wallet has achieved. It is a sham and a perversion of the American justice system, what is being done to them. And the world is not a safer place because Samourai Wallet was arrested. It's a more dangerous and evil and obviously less free place. That criminals inevitably use privacy services is irrelevant. Criminals use all the tools that other people use. That's never been an argument against privacy. With that said, there's only one tool that we should be concerned about that bad people use, and that tool is government. So, Q&A and Seth for Privacy, welcome to the show. Appreciate you guys coming on. These two guys work for Foundation Devices, which is a Bitcoin hardware wallet company. Really good wallet. You guys can check them out. They also talk a lot about what's happening in the real Bitcoin space, and they've been on top of this situation. So, first of all, Seth, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thanks so much for having me, Gabriel, and thanks for having both of us. It's been a hard couple of weeks. I think there's been legitimate grieving and just a lot of different stages of kind of figuring out where we go next with the best privacy tool for Bitcoin being shut down overnight. It's a crazy world we live in, but I think you said it so well in that intro that this is truly shutting down the dream of what a lot of us want America to be, or maybe thought America was before we've seen more and more tyranny grow over the last years. Grateful to be here. Excited to talk about this, not because it's fun to talk about, but because it's essential to talk about. And if we let the noise around this die, if we let the signal around what's happening to Samourai and TDEV, what's happening in the broader space under honestly oppressive U.S. government right now, we will lose. But there's hope as long as we keep talking about these things, pushing in every way possible. And doing shows like this is a vital way to continue doing that. So grateful to be here.
Thank you, and well said. If you're interested in somebody who has their finger on the pulse of this, definitely follow Seth for Privacy on Twitter. We'll have all the links we mentioned here in the show notes and description. And then Q&A, welcome back to the show. He runs a website called BitcoinR.guide, and that's always been a very useful resource for anybody getting into Bitcoin privacy. And Q&A is also on Twitter and makes podcast appearances and things of this sort. Q&A, how are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Thanks, Gabriel. Basically, just echo everything that Seth said. I'm, happy to be back on, but obviously not happy about the circumstances and why we're here and what we're here to talk about. But it's important that we cover these topics, make people aware so that they can get behind the support of the defence as and when that starts to arise, but also be aware of the potential implications and the ramifications that this case, whichever way it goes, is going to have on the rest of the industry. And I'm sure we can dive into that as part of today's chat.
I want to approach this episode in three parts. First of all, and most importantly, I want to talk about the Samourai Wallet situation, get into some of the details here, and of course, what we can do to help these gentlemen who have been fighting for our freedom for the last decade. And after that, I wanted to talk to Seth and Q&A about what we should be doing with our own Samourai wallets, if we have them, and what some of the consequences of this are, because as they got arrested, their computers and servers were seized. The Samourai Wallet website has been seized by the FBI. So we want to talk about our own situations, and then finally just have some thoughts on the bigger issues with Bitcoin. Samourai Wallet's one of many people who have been targeted in the last couple of weeks, in the last month. So just get a sense of the bigger issues. But starting with Samourai Wallet. So for those who aren't familiar, just a very quick summary. On the surface, Samourai Wallet is an Android-only Bitcoin wallet. Android-only because Android's the best place to use certain features that they use, such as Tor. But it's more than that. The technologies that Samourai Wallet developed within the wallet, such as Whirlpool and some of the other technologies, allowed you essentially to use the blockchain against itself to kind of protect your privacy and create some anonymity. And it was very ingenious stuff. And these tools, such as Whirlpool, were also used in other wallets, such as Sparrow Wallet. So they were developers of Bitcoin privacy technology largely. And the two people who ran it were arrested. We have Samourai, the speaking representative, we'll call him Samourai, and TDev, who was the developer. One was extradited from Portugal. So that's pretty crazy. So just reading from the DOJ website to get the summary of their charges: conspiracy to commit money laundering and conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitting business. These charges arise from the defendant's development, marketing, and operation of a cryptocurrency mixer that executed over $2 billion in unlawful transactions and facilitated more than $100 million in money laundering transactions from illegal dark web markets such as Silk Road and Hydra Market, a web server intrusion, a spear phishing scheme, and schemes to defraud multiple decentralized finance protocols. And then they go on: in coordination with law enforcement authorities in Iceland, Samourai's web servers and domain, samourai.io, were seized. Additionally, a seizure warrant for Samourai's mobile application was served on the Google Play Store. As a result, the application will no longer be available to be downloaded from the Google Play Store in the United States. So there's a few notable things that stand out from that. Well, I guess the DOJ considers Bitcoin money, first of all, if they can do money laundering. They use the term mixer, which has never been a good way of describing CoinJoin. The weird thing is that Samourai Wallet was always very attuned to the law, right? They were doing radical things, but they were always very attuned to the law. FinCEN, which is a different institution within the US, had these guidelines that basically talked about custody. As long as you're not taking custody, then you're good. And Samourai Wallet was particularly designed so that they never took custody. So what happened then? Why did they get arrested if they were following all the guidelines that FinCEN had given them over the years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's been a lot of back and forth and a lot of good conversations in the space since this happened. And I think the answer could be one of two things. One is the guidance doesn't matter. And the government decided that they want to limit the access that especially American citizens have to privacy tools. Because this isn't just Samourai Wallet that's been happening recently. There's also Tornado Cash, which was a privacy tool on Ethereum. They've shut down all Bitcoin privacy tools. There's also been actions against access to Monero, which we can get into some more of that later. But there seems to be a broad desire by the US government and a concerted effort to prevent people from having access to privacy tools. So while there is technically still a justice system and technically still a court of law that has to deal with these things, and it is important to remember that this is quote unquote just an indictment. So they're not convicted of anything at this point, and theoretically they're innocent until proven guilty. The court system is not always perfectly just. So we'll have to see how that plays out. So there could be a piece of it that's just the government saying, we don't care what our regulations were. We're going to set precedent through criminal prosecution. We're going to set the law through criminal prosecution. But there's also a flip side, which a lot of us in the space, especially someone called Lola Leitz, it's kind of the name that she goes by in the space, we've been unpacking some of the FATF, FATF guidance, which is an international body. You can think of them kind of like FinCEN, but essentially the Western countries in the world that get approved sit on this unelected board that we have no control over as individual citizens. And then they also set guidance for financial crimes, money laundering, all the kind of stuff that sounds scary, but usually isn't. And they have guidance from 2021, which is more recent than the FinCEN guidance from 2019 that most of us were going off of, where they essentially say that anyone who operates a service and has any primary role in the ability to use the service. Like even if you just run a front end, but the back end is decentralized, they essentially say that counts as what they call a virtual asset service provider. And you have to implement KYC AML, you have to get IDs and everyone who uses your service. You have to do all of this crazy, crazy stuff, even if you're just doing like a web UI or something like that. And they're quite clear that custody doesn't matter to them. Whereas FinCEN, like you mentioned, talked quite clearly about custody being a key aspect of whether or not you were counted as a money transmission business. But we've also seen in the Tornado Cash case, in a response from the government, while the Tornado Cash defense lawyers were trying to dismiss the indictment, the government responded and essentially said that FinCEN guidance is not authoritative. You should not concern yourself with what FinCEN has said in the past, that custody does not matter. Having custody or not having custody doesn't change whether you're a money transmission business, and are essentially trying to broaden the scope of the control that the US government can have over any cryptocurrency tool to really anything, any wallet provider that provides a node backend, even if it's not a privacy tool, could be fitting under this. So it's a broad sweeping set of things, and it's hard to know exactly what is legal. And I think there's a lot of benefit for the government to leave things very murky, as they have always done. And it's to our detriment because, well, I think basically everyone in the space thought that what Samourai Wallet was doing was totally above board and legal. Like you mentioned, they weren't ever taking custody of funds. They were very careful that what they were doing fit every known definition of being a service that did not have to do KYC AML, all of that stuff. It's hard to know because there's so many governmental bodies seemingly at war with each other and putting out different guidance that the DOJ can just kind of pick and choose as they see fit what guidance they want to enforce at any given time, which is terrifying. It's tyrannical. It's not something that should be possible, but that's kind of where it feels like we're at right now.
It seems like that statement by the infamous Soviet politician, "Show me the man and I'll show you the crime." While this stuff is being figured out, it makes sense to anybody who has even the faintest whiff of justice that if there's confusion among different parts of the government, then they shouldn't be arresting people until they've figured it out themselves. Absolutely insane. And it also reminds me, by the way, we're talking about FinCEN, the department, so-called Department of Justice, that these both are institutions of unelected people. This is what some people would refer to as the deep state. John McAfee famously said about 70% of the laws that Americans are beholden to come from unelected officials, from these institutions who are below the elected officials. So that's something to keep in mind here. I just wanted to then break down the two allegations. We have one for conspiracy to commit money laundering and conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitting business.
I think the easiest one to cover off first is the conspiracy to commit money laundering. The key focus here should be on conspiracy. So they haven't actually indicted them for the action of committing money laundering, more only a conspiracy to do so. And we can only read between the lines and kind of glean as to why that might be the case. A common thought process here is around some tweets that were made around kind of welcoming Russian oligarchs that was made by one of the indicted individuals. Clearly said in jest, but of course that's, severity of which has been taken out of hand. To add some weight to the indictment, there's also some Twitter DMs, I believe, that are featured in the indictment that make mention of kind of grey and black markets, I believe, with one of the founders as well. And from what I can see within the indictment, that is all that seems to be driving, at least from what we know right now, the indictment on the conspiracy to commit money laundering. So I think for me, correct me if I'm wrong, Seth, unless you've got anything to add here, that's the kind of easier one to kind of draw a conclusion as to the intent of. And the more interesting one, and the one that has the wider ramifications for the whole industry and that's already starting to cause a chilling effect, is the money transmitter indictment. Because as you correctly said at the top of the show, Gabriel, the Samourai Wallet ecosystem was entirely non-custodial. So they never, at any part of their stack, depending on how you used it, ever had control of your funds at all. as Seth alluded to, they were following the FinCEN guidance that's been around, I believe, since around 2015, that basically multiple times has come out to say, if you are not a custodian, you do not qualify as a money transmitter, and thus you do not need to carry out all of the horrible regulations that go with being a classified money transmitter. So KYC, AML, all of that word soup jargon bullshit. So they were following the guidance, acting how they thought within the law. So that's the most egregious part of this indictment to me, is that they've been arrested. They have been accused of being a money transmitter despite following guidance to the contrary.
Yeah, I think just harping on what Q&A mentioned, that the odd thing in this case is both that they're only charging for conspiracy for both counts. There's no charge of actual money laundering or actual running of an unlicensed money transmission business, which is especially odd because they've been running Samourai Wallet as a wallet application, as a back-end service for privacy for years. So it's not like the situation where these people, where Samourai and TDev were working on releasing something that they wanted to use for money laundering or money transmission. I mean, this tool has been out for years and years. So it's a very odd thing that they would only charge for conspiracy. But I think it goes to show that there is no precedent for what they're doing, which is operating a privacy tool that does not take custody of customer funds at any point in the process. There's no precedent for that being money transmission. And the money laundering charge, as Q&A mentioned, the main evidence seems to be tweets and DMs talking about this stuff, as well as an investor pitch deck where they mentioned that they want to serve black and gray markets, which is a little bit more of a gray area, no pun intended, but still isn't them saying like, there's nothing in the indictment where like an FBI agent goes like, hey, I've got some drug money, like I really want to use Samourai Wallet for this drug money. And they go, yeah, sure, we love drug money. Like there's nothing like that in the indictment. Obviously, we don't know what else the DOJ has under their sleeve or up their sleeve, if they have something where they had a conversation like that and something was said. We don't know. But in the indictment, at least, it seems like the conspiracy to commit money laundering is more of a scare tactic. And the interesting thing when you look at the sentences or the potential sentences is that conspiracy to commit money laundering has by far the larger sentence, 20 years. Whereas conspiracy to run an unlicensed money transmission business is a max of 5 years. So seemingly, the thing that's most important for them to convict on is money laundering. But as Q&A mentioned, the thing that sets the precedent for the rest of the space, and the thing that would have a chilling effect or actually make illegal running privacy tools as a business in the US, would be the conspiracy to commit or to operate an unlicensed money transmission business. So it'll be interesting to see what the DOJ tries to do. Maybe they'll try to get them to plead guilty to the money transmission business, so they only get a couple years in jail to set the precedent, even though money laundering is the one that is maybe a little bit more possible in a court of law. But we'll just have to kind of see what happens there. But it's an odd approach the DOJ is taking, and one that seems to imply that they also think that there's not a clear set of guidance or a clear precedent for either of these things actually having happened.
The thing that separates Samourai Wallet from other wallets is that it's using Whirlpool. As we said, there's also some other technologies, but Whirlpool is the main one. That is presumably what they'll be talking about as regards money laundering. But the unlicensed money transmitting business, now, couldn't that just be any Bitcoin wallet?
That kind of seems to be the way that they're reaching. It's hard to judge because the language that they use also kind of implies that they don't understand how any of this stuff works. So it's hard to gauge exactly what they're thinking as far as how wide-reaching this precedent would be. But if Samourai Wallet is considered a money transmission business without having ever taken custody of funds, the only thing that separates it from any other Bitcoin software wallet that uses someone else's node is the two tools that are cited in the indictment, which is Whirlpool, which provided kind of forward-looking privacy that helped you to separate the history of your Bitcoin transactions from their past, and the Ricochet tool, which essentially just added extra hops before you actually sent funds to the destination you wanted. And those are the only tools actually cited in the indictment, despite there being other peer-to-peer or local-only tools in Samourai Wallet. And those are the only separations. And that's why I don't think this is an attack on self-custody yet. Like, I don't think their goal is to prevent anyone who runs or who creates a mobile Bitcoin wallet that connects to their own remote node. They're not trying to make that illegal as far as I can tell. But the bigger thing for them is preventing access to financial privacy. And I think this is where a lot of people don't understand that the freedom aspect of Bitcoin as freedom money is only really true if we have privacy when using Bitcoin. Because if the government can easily surveil what we're doing, if counterparties in any transaction or trade that we make can easily see the balance of our wallet or see the history of our funds, we drastically lose the amount of freedom that Bitcoin can provide, and often can be at greater harm than using something like a credit card, or especially using something like cash. And I think the government understands that if they can restrict or prevent access to financial privacy on Bitcoin, they're totally fine with the rest of Bitcoin, with ETFs, with centralized KYC exchanges, potentially even with self-custody if they have clear links between identity and people's on-chain activity, which would be true if there was no good privacy tool on Bitcoin.
Of course, if you look at the Bill of Rights, these are designed to make the job of law enforcement more difficult, because the principles of America have always been freedom, much more than so-called safety. I would argue that that's a false dichotomy. I think freedom gives you more safety, but the emphasis in America has always been on freedom. And so all this stuff about protecting against terrorism, everybody knows that's a scam. Everybody knows that's not what's happening here. It's about people in power who want more power. So, and it is pretty crazy if they start to mention tools like Ricochet, because that's basically a way of having multiple transactions in a row to make it seem as though there's a large separation between your Whirlpool activity and where you're now sending your funds. So that's just a kind of very regular behavior. We'll see some of the nonsense exposed, I hope, in the court case. Just your quick thoughts on some of the other things in the DOJ statement. They talk about, in addition to the money laundering, they mention a web server intrusion, a spear phishing scheme, and schemes to defraud multiple decentralized finance protocols. We don't have to go into too much detail, but
yeah, so it's written very confusingly, but what they're actually talking about there is what the $100 million in money laundered Bitcoin were from. So when I first read that too, I was very confused, because it makes it sound like Samourai Wallet did these things. But what they're actually saying is that the tiny percentage of the inflows to Samourai Wallet that they want to scare everyone with this money laundering term, those are some of the things that this was profit from. So there were people who were doing a web server intrusion, spear phishing schemes to defraud DeFi applications, and the profits from that, they're saying, were sent through Samourai Wallet. So it's a little confusing at the first read, but they're really just saying, they're trying to scare people and say, like, look at all the bad things that were happening that happened through Samourai Wallet. Even though, of course, they leave out the fact that 96.4% of the activity in Samourai Wallet, by their own numbers, was totally illicit, above board, and by totally reasonable, good, privacy-loving people.
Yeah, I think there's an intentional amount of confusion throughout this whole indictment. Seth, you just gave a great example there of, if you read their numbers backwards, like 95% of all of the funds allegedly going through Whirlpool are used for non-quote-unquote illicit purposes. I've just found another quote that point 22, if anybody's interested, and I'll read it for quotes. Under federal law, all money transmitting businesses, including businesses engaged in the transmission of cryptocurrencies such as BTC, are required to register with the USD Department of Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. The very people whose guidance Samourai were following that classified them not as a money transmitter because they didn't take custody of funds. It's just completely bonkers and completely backwards that, they're saying that they need to register with FinCEN, and they're following the FinCEN guidance, so they didn't need to register and do KYC, AML, etc. There's just so many misleading statements, and another egregious part to me is some of the language that's used. And I said this on another podcast the other day, that when this eventually goes in front of a jury, the Bitcoin itself is a very complex topic to most normal people who are not entrenched in the ecosystem. Bitcoin privacy increases that complication tenfold. Then when you throw in all of the legal jargon it gets even more confusing. So I think they're being very choice about the word and the language that they're using. That is going to be very easy to influence the thought process of any normal non-Bitcoiner that's going to be likely be part of a jury that's deciding the way in which this case is going to go. So it's going to be very, very difficult for the defense to explain all of these complex topics that we're kind of skimming over on this podcast, even though we're somewhat kind of more experienced users in the space. It's difficult for us to understand and to consider the implications of a normal a jury of however many people that barely know what Bitcoin is, faced with all of these accusatory comments and legal jargon. It feels like the everything's weighted in one direction, if that kind of makes sense.
Following up on that same part of this Department of Justice letter, how are they so confident that they know how many so-called unlawful transactions took place?
Yeah, I think the thing that some people don't understand is that it's very easy to trace funds going into Samourai Wallet. There's a very clear on-chain footprint of people who use Samourai Wallet and use the Whirlpool tool within Samourai Wallet, because the actual structure, the footprint of those transactions is very clear on-chain. So I could pull up a blockchain explorer right now, and it would be relatively easy to find every transaction that was a Whirlpool transaction and see what inputs were a part of that. The big thing with Whirlpool is that no matter what you can see going into Whirlpool, there has been as far as I know, no documented cases of anyone being able to properly trace those funds through Whirlpool. So on the other side of that transaction, there's no way for anyone to deterministically know which output lines up with which input. So it's easy for them to know how much funds flowed into Samourai Wallet, but it's very hard for them to know what happened with those funds next. So when they're talking about how much money from like the Silk Road supposedly flowed into Samourai Wallet, that's definitely possible, because the lack of native on-chain privacy in Bitcoin means that when you choose to gain privacy, it does stand out on-chain in almost every approach that's possible right now in Bitcoin. There are a couple of exceptions that have their own drawbacks, but generally it's clear on-chain when you're using a tool like Samourai Wallet Whirlpool. But the big thing is that on the other side of that, no one knows which output is yours, and so they can't trace funds through it, even if they know that you use Samourai Wallet Whirlpool at some point.
Obviously, this arrest is terrible, but if we know anything about these two, is that they're fighters, and they've often talked about that if things need to get fought in court, then that is the next arena that they will be fighting in. So you can be sure they're just going to take this fight for freedom to the courts. Is there any chance that good things could come out of this trial beyond just their freedom from jail?
I would say that if they fight this and they win on both counts, the key standout for me would be a backing up of the initial FinCEN guidance that these guys operated a non-custodial open source piece of software that never at any point took custody of users' funds, and that does not in any way constitute a money transmitter's business. If that is ruled, and that is ruled in our, and I use our, talking about the whole industry, in our favor, then essentially, it's even more clarity for other people, onlookers that are building similar tools, be they, focused privacy tools like Samourai and Whirlpool, or just a plain old wallet that has a default backend like Blue Wallet or something like that. It just provides that additional point of clarity that, yes, I'm not going to be scared to get a knock on the door at 6 a.m. next week because I wrote some open source code that may or may not be deemed as a money transmitting business. So additional clarity is that it would be one of the main wins, aside from the blatantly obvious, two freedom fighters being free and not wrongfully jailed.
Yeah, I definitely would echo that. And I think that it is vital that people recognize that this is just at the indictment stage. There's been nothing in court yet. We don't have any clarity on how the justice system overall will handle this case. So there is definitely still hope that this case can actually be won. And the precedent that would set would be absolutely fantastic. Honestly, if it goes well, it could be on the level of the case that set code as free speech into law. Now, obviously, will that happen? That's impossible to know for sure. And obviously, the justice system has its issues, but there is still hope for that. And I don't want people to just become hopeless because of this indictment when the DOJ can essentially indict anyone for anything. But getting it actually into the court of law and getting it convicted is another step past that. So that's important to keep in mind. And the only other thing that I've been trying to say every time I talk about this is that there is still nothing in this indictment, Tornado Cash, any of the other craziness that's happening right now that says that writing and publishing open source code is illegal in any way or will become illegal in any way in the US. Obviously, I'm talking specifically about the US. And so there is still vast protections for people writing open source code. The thing that's under attack here is that Samourai Wallet operated this service and took profit from it. Those are the specific things that the government is claiming were problematic. And it is different than a wallet with a node backend, even though there's a lack of clarity there from the government. But just writing code and publishing it, being a Bitcoin core dev, writing a wallet software that lets people connect to their own nodes, there is no lack of clarity there. That's still clearly protected under the Constitution and under US law. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And it is possible that this case will set a greater positive precedent if it goes well. But that's also where a lot of us have the responsibility to get the word out to our friends and families and shift social consensus in the US, help people to understand how these tools worked and how ridiculous it is that someone who didn't take custody and thus cannot transfer funds for someone else is being considered someone who transmitted funds for someone else. The logic is absurd here. So we each have our own role to play in talking to friends and family, using whatever platform we have to help clarify what's actually going on here.
Well, sure. And, Samourai and TDEV, they are America. So let's just hope that the jury and the justice system find their American values along the way. So speaking of supporting these two men, obviously spread the word, share this podcast, follow Seth and Q&A and just spread the word, bring awareness. There's a website that cropped up, freesamourai.com, has some resources pertaining to this issue. Anything else we can do? I'm not aware of any donation links. I'm sure those will be widely shared when they're available. Any other clear ways to support these two at the moment?
I think you covered all the obvious steps. I don't think there's anything obvious other than that. I would imagine the defense will be leading any kind of financial support, and I would urge people to get involved with that. If you've ever even looked at Samourai Wallet, and gained a little bit of value from what these two people on their team have built for the ecosystem, I'm going to be forever thankful and would push as many people as possible to get involved financially to support this defense, because I'm sure it's not going to be cheap.
Okay, so Samourai and TDEV, if you can hear this, hang in there. We've got your back. And with that, let's just move over to some helpfulness for people who have been using Samourai Wallets and talking about what happens now to that software and technology. So as I was reading earlier, the account that was transmitting the Samourai Wallet to the Google Play Store has been compromised. Their servers, which were running all of this free and open source software, have been compromised. So Q&A, just as a kind of a starter question, if people have been using the Samourai Wallet and maybe they have some funds in there and they read all this stuff, they're likely to be panicked. Like, what does one do right now if one has been using Samourai Wallet?
Yeah, good question. So I'll preface this by saying there's a couple of great blogs on freedom.tech, our blog website that Seth's the editor of, that go through the details of how Samourai worked, and more importantly, how you can migrate from Samourai to restore access to your funds if you were using one of the defaults or the default backend server that has been now unfortunately taken down. So if you don't want to kind of listen along to what I'm about to say, just use that as a point of reference as well. So there's a couple of things to consider here. If you were a Samourai Wallet user that runs your own dojo, that could be in the shape of a vanilla dojo that you run on a laptop, could be a Ronin dojo, could be a dojo on an Umbrella or similar. Then you're unaffected by this essentially because you're using your own backend. You're not reliant on the default Samourai backend. The only impact that you would have already felt by now is the fact that you can no longer whirlpool funds, because obviously the whirlpool coordinator server has also been taken down. So from a pure access to your funds and ability to spend perspective, those types of users that run their own dojo are completely unaffected and they don't need to take any immediate action. For users that were using Samourai Wallet with the default backend, which again has now been taken down, unfortunately, they're going to have some problems spending because the node that wallet is trying to talk to is no longer online. So they have a couple of options. I'll start with the kind of easier one and the more elegant one, would be to grab your seed words, which you can see in the settings of the app, and your passphrase, which is not shown visibly within the app. Hopefully you've got a backup of that. And if you haven't, you can also test what you think your passphrase is in the settings of the application as well. So grab those two pieces of information and then import them into Sparrow Wallet, which is a desktop application. So the way it would work is you grab your seed word, you grab your passphrase, you elect that you want to import a wallet within Sparrow. You tell it you want to do a software wallet, enter the seed words, enter your passphrase, and click on apply. That will then restore the single default account that all Bitcoin wallets use. And if you don't see all of your funds there right now, you will then need to go ahead and add the Whirlpool account, which can be done in a couple of clicks just by pressing into the settings menu. That's one of the main reasons why I suggest Sparrow for this, is that you don't have to mess with any derivation paths to try and find, are my funds in pre-mix, bad bank, are they in post-mix, where are they? With Sparrow, because it used to be a Whirlpool client, it's already pre-configured that you can just add those accounts, multiple accounts with a single click. So that should restore 90% of most users' balances. For the few that get to this point in the journey and are still missing some balance, what's likely happened is that they've also got some funds stored in different script types. So older addresses, maybe older addresses that start with a 1 or a 3, known as like the legacy or the wrapped SegWit type of addresses. Sparrow handles these as independent wallets. So all you would need to do there is repeat the steps I've just mentioned with the seed and the passphrase, but rather than leaving the script type on the default native SegWit, which are the addresses that most people use beginning with BC1Q, you would change that script type you'd have to do it once for legacy, the addresses that start with 1, and then once again for the nested SegWit addresses that start with 3. So hopefully if you've got this far in the journey, you should have restored access and be able to see all of your funds, albeit that because of the way Sparrow handles different script types, they will unfortunately now be split across different wallets, but you can choose to consolidate from there should you wish to do so. The other option is that you can put your Samourai wallet into offline mode, which cuts the internet connection. You'll then be able to construct a transaction as you normally would within Samourai. Obviously, because you're in offline mode, you'll get to a point where the wallet tries to send the transaction without an internet connection. It will fail, obviously, but it will then give you the option to save the transaction, the hex of the transaction, like the raw coded transaction, that you can then copy to your clipboard and then send that to, you can open a browser, go to any of the transaction broadcasting services, of which there are many. The one that springs to mind is mempool.space/push, I believe. That will have a text box on it. And you can just go ahead and paste in that transaction so that you can construct the spend in Samourai that sends all of the funds out of this wallet and send it into a new wallet where you're connected to a backend that is working correctly. The reason I say that that's the less elegant way to do it is obviously the way in which you construct that transaction is important here. You might be merging all of your coins into one wallet and degrading some of the privacy that you gained whilst using Samourai Wallet whilst it was fully functional. But if you find yourself in a pinch, that could be another option to explore.
And then for the Samourai Wallet app itself, as the DOJ said, they are now in control of the app, at least on the Google Play Store. And Seth, in your article that Q&A mentioned, you say, unfortunately, the architecture of Samourai Wallet meant that your XPub, a master public key allowing anyone holding it to derive all your past, present, future Bitcoin addresses, was at some point in time held by Samourai and could now possibly be in the hands of the DOJ. Though it's a worst case scenario, you should assume that your XPub was compromised and thus all previous mixes you have done have been unwound and are now traceable. You should also assume that the government can now derive all past, present, future addresses of yours and track movements of funds if so desired.
I think I see where you're heading. You're saying, okay, once you've got it in Sparrow, would you advise to, move funds off to a new seed that has a new XPub that you can get good forward privacy from then on. Yeah, so you make a good point, Gabriel, around the potential privacy risk. Obviously, we were never going to know for sure what's actually happened with those XPubs. Were they stored on the server? Were they cached? Were they cleared periodically? We don't know what level of information was on that server at the time that it was seized by the DOJ. So we can only kind of give some conjecture and assume the worst and say that everything was available at the time. If that were to be true, then the best advice, as Seth put in his blog post, would be to move to a new wallet. So once you kind of restored access to your funds via either of the two methods that I mentioned earlier, I would advise the Spiral one, just to reiterate, would be then to start a new software wallet somewhere else. Would advise, again, Sparrow is a great option to do that, where you can then send the funds out to a new wallet with a new set of seed words, and more importantly, a new set of public keys that are not known to the DOJ. Obviously, how you do that is fairly critical in terms of how much privacy you are kind of left with after this whole process. If you were to, take the easy option and the cheapest option and just merge them all together, then it's going to be plain for anybody with access or access to mempool.space that using the common input ownership heuristic, they can see that all of these addresses that are from this known XPub to the DOJ have been combined into a single address, and we know that it's still that same entity. On the flip side of that kind of spectrum, I guess, is that you'd be slowly sending individual coins off to new addresses within this new wallet with, at random time intervals, using random amounts with differing fee rates. Obviously, that's going to be the most private way because you're not merging coins. However, it's also going to be the most expensive way because you have the most amount of transactions to make. So I guess the best advice would be to have a think about what's important to you. Are you okay spending a bit more on fees to maintain the privacy that you gain via Whirlpool? Great, break it down and do, infrequent transactions using all of the criteria that I mentioned earlier to maintain that privacy that you gained. But if you're in a rush or in a panic, or you really don't want to spend any more money on fees than you absolutely have to, then start to consolidate some of those UTXOs, knowing full well that doing so is going to degrade your privacy somewhat because you are showing common input of those common ownership, of those inputs, as and when you merge them into transactions into that new wallet that you've got control of.
So, Seth, this was a FOSS project from the beginning. What do you think the next steps are for the awesome FOSS technology that was in Samourai Wallet, but the specific implementation of them right now has been compromised? What do you think the future is for this technology?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. It's hard to say if someone else will want to take up this mantle when clearly it would be legally dangerous to do so. So I'm certainly not going to advocate for that. I don't know. it's a scary place to be in right now. I think the important thing in the meantime is finding and maintaining the code that Samourai Wallet published. One of the really unfortunate things is that because they published their code on a server that they hosted, when their servers were seized, all the code was taken on with it. And it surprisingly doesn't seem like we had good copies of all the code and good up-to-date copies. I am as much guilty as anyone else because I actually have a Git server that I use to mirror other repos, and somehow I just hadn't gotten the Samourai Wallet ones. I don't know why I didn't have those when I had so many others in the space that I mirrored intentionally. I think that the community has been able to recover the majority of it, but some of the repos are likely out of date from the most recent that were available when they were taken down. So maintaining the project is going to be a little bit trickier if we can't get the latest versions of that code. So the main thing I would say is just if anyone out there had been doing any like fork of Samourai Wallet, if they had for some reason just cloned the repo recently or something like that, reach out to other people in the community, reach out to me on Twitter, whatever, because it is important that the code that they had written remains public and remains something that anyone has access to. And it is, like, I do want to be very clear, there's nothing illegal about having the code, the actual repositories of Samourai Wallet. The only thing that would be tenuous would be if you decided to actually like run a Whirlpool server and help people to create collaborative transactions. But just having the code itself, there's nothing illegal about that, and it's something that we should do our best to preserve, especially in the case where, like we said, this is just at the indictment stage. If Samourai Wallet wins, who knows what the DOJ will do with the code that they had seized on servers. They might not give it back. So we also want to preserve this in case there is the ability to legally run this stuff after a win in court and a good precedent being set. So that's definitely the hopeful case, but that's the biggest thing for me. I think the only thing that we didn't touch on is just that because of the centralization of the Google Play Store and the servers of Samourai Wallet being seized, it's very likely that the signing keys that Samourai Wallet used were seized. It's hard to know for sure, but the big thing to do if you were a user of Samourai Wallet and you did install it through the Google Play Store or F-Droid is to just disable automatic updates to be sure that if it wouldn't be legal, but if the DOJ pushed a malicious APK to try to gain some sort of information on users or confiscate funds, whatever they would try to do, that can't be pushed automatically at the very least. So that's the only other little piece, but I think Q&A really covered the XPub sides of things. And it sounds a little bit dramatic, but we kind of have to assume the worst to protect ourselves as best we can.
Right. And final question for this segment. So one of the problems here is that Whirlpool has been shut down just across the board. Sparrow has an update now. You can no longer, that doesn't even have Whirlpool as an option. That service has been seized. It did require people to run that and to arrange it. And so that is no longer an option. We've known that there have been other options to do coin joins. There was Wasabi, which we were never really recommending, and now Wasabi is actually shutting down, at least in the US. So that's not even something that some people will consider. There's Join Market. What would you recommend, Q&A, for people who still want to be using Bitcoin privacy right now until the Samourai Wallet technology and legal situation is fleshed out, they're freed, and all this stuff is made clearly legal?
Yeah, good question. I'll start with the negatives first. In terms of a service or solution that breaks 100% deterministic links to give your coins a completely fresh start, there just isn't another option right now, unfortunately. So that's why I'm so keen to see a positive result here. To reinstate this service, as well as all the obvious other benefits of freeing those individuals. There are some tools already out there that do currently exist that you can still use to gain or maintain some level of privacy or add some ambiguity to your transactions when using Bitcoin. Most notably, Sparrow and Samourai still have the default Stonewall algorithm built into both of their wallets that is fully operational. Quick TLDR there is that it creates a mini fake two-person coin join with only your UTXOs. So it intentionally includes more UTXOs than is necessary and more outputs than are necessary when you're making a spend to a third party to, again, provide some ambiguity as to the flow of funds. Is this one person paying one person? Is it two people paying one person? Is it two people paying two people, etc.? It just casts doubt over what's actually happening in that transaction. Within Samourai Wallet, as I haven't tested this, but I believe you can also still do offline cahoots as well. So you could do two-person coin joins. You could do a Stonewall X2, which is basically exactly what I've just described with Stonewall, but instead of it being just your UTXOs, it also does that with another privacy-preserving individual. So it can buy both of your UTXOs for you to be able to pay a third party. That's nowhere near as slick as it used to be because it used to run over a Tor-based communications layer that was hosted by the Samourai team called Soroban. So to achieve that, those cahoots transactions now, you need to do it the kind of old-fashioned way where you're communicating and pasting either text strings back and forth or you're scanning QR codes back and forth. So nowhere near as slick as it used to be, but if you've got the desire there, you can still do that sort of thing. And then outside of that, the best coin join option we have right now is Join Market. I've actually been testing Jam, the web-based UI, just to kind of get some hands-on experiences to see, how it works and, what it's like from a user experience perspective. I think it is, as most people suggest, fairly rough around the edges, but absolutely the best option we've got right now for kind of participating in larger collaborative transactions. Would urge people to go and give it a try. As I say, it's the best option we've got right now, but be very, very careful with how you configure the fees. I'm still trying to figure this out myself right now, but basically, if you go in and you're a taker within this kind of ecosystem, you are the one footing not only the fee that are paid to the coordinators, or the kind of coordinate is a bad word because join market is completely decentralized, but the makers, the people who are putting their coins up for you to be able to mix with, you have to pay them a fee, which is generally can be configured to be very, very small. But you also have to foot the bill for all of the mining fees for the entire transaction, which in right now fees are pretty good. We're below 20 sats per byte, so it's not too bad. But you start jacking those fee rates up to 50, 100, 200 sats per byte, which we've seen in recent weeks, then join market quickly becomes prohibitively expensive unless you're a huge whale and you don't mind spending a couple 100,000 sats worth of fees to do a single coin join. That's the other final thing that kind of hit home to me around the difference in fee structures between Whirlpool and with join market. With join market, you're paying, one person pays all of the miner fees for a single mix, whereas in Samourai, you kind of shared that fee burden. You paid it once and then you could remix indefinitely. So I really took that for granted. I fully understood how it worked, but now I've moved to had to move to an alternative solution or something to explore. It really hit home how clever that fee structure was within the Whirlpool ecosystem, and longing at the moment to have that back, because join market is going to become very expensive if the fees start to rise again.
So at this point, I assume that Seth is chomping at the bit to talk about Monero. That's obviously a useful tool that we can be using. And so just before we get to that, though, I wanted to just quickly mention that there have been other events happening surrounding Samourai Wallet. There was the arrest of Roger Ver for alleged tax crimes, even though he had renounced his U.S. citizenship 10 years ago. He was arrested in Spain. There was in previous months, the Bitcoin fog and Tornado Cash scandals. There have been some other things going on as a result of Samourai Wallet being arrested and shut down. Wasabi announced they're pulling out of the US and then shutting down. Phoenix Wallet has pulled out of the US. And recently, local Monero is also shutting down. So there's a lot of consequences of this, and there are a lot of people afraid, understandably. Just kind of thinking about where we go from here as privacy seekers. What would you recommend for people who are not just thinking within Bitcoin, Seth? What are some solutions? And also, some of these solutions are kind of shutting down every day now. So where do you see this going?
Oh, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, this is really broader than the Bitcoin ecosystem, which I think is vital that people understand that this isn't just a Bitcoin thing. Just like when Tornado Cash was first sanctioned and then indicted, it wasn't just an Ethereum thing. This is a war on access to financial privacy. And the government has shown that they are willing to do whatever it takes to either technically prevent people from accessing financial privacy, or make it harder, or make people scared in the thought of accessing financial privacy. And that's really where we're at. So when it comes to other tools, I mean, Q&A covered the only remaining Bitcoin privacy tool, which is a crazy thought and something I never thought I would say 2 weeks ago. But join market's definitely the only and thus best available option on Bitcoin. But thankfully, I don't think people should be tied to this Bitcoin only mindset. I don't think they ever should have, but I think that should be clearer than ever. If you care at all about financial privacy, unfortunately, that just became drastically harder and more costly in the Bitcoin ecosystem almost overnight. And so the big alternative that has been building for adversarial environments since 2014 is Monero. This exact type of scenario is why Monero was built, why the design choices were made around mining, why the design choices were made around consensus level privacy instead of app level privacy. All of those choices have culminated in something that is as close to digital cash as humanly possible today, and something that is also continuing to improve with big upgrades on the horizon as well. So I would definitely recommend people taking the leap, trying Monero, seeing how easy it is to gain financial privacy by just using Monero for their spending. I think long term, there's also the case to be made for Monero as a store of value, because I personally don't like a store of value that anyone can see my wealth in. And if I don't have a way to gain privacy on Bitcoin easily, that becomes harder and harder to do. But at least I think the starting point for everyone should be, if you care about financial privacy, if you want financial privacy for yourself or others, start to use Monero. Unfortunately, the government understands that Monero is unstoppable at the protocol level. They're not able to actually stop the privacy functionality of Monero, because they'd have to shut down every node on the network. They'd have to shut down every miner, which is just regular computers. But what they can do is limit access to Monero. So a couple of days ago, we saw the shutdown of the only way to acquire Monero without giving over KYC, without giving over your ID, which is called local Monero. But thankfully, if you already have Bitcoin, there are lots of ways to get Monero in a way that that protects your privacy along the way. So the two main ones are BISC, which is a decentralized exchange that's built around Bitcoin. It can be a little costly if fees are high, but it's a fantastic tool for swapping Bitcoin for Monero and vice versa. For a very long time, the highest volume on BISC, even though it's primarily a Bitcoin exchange, is actually Bitcoin to Monero, because it's a good tool for that. And then the other one that's not decentralized but functions very well is called Trocador, Trocador. And it's kind of an aggregator of instant exchanges. So if you're trying to swap just a little bit of Bitcoin for Monero, it's a good solution for that, and can be a good option. But really, I think this is as good a time as any for people to start to actually use Monero and understand how it works, or not understand how it works and still gain strong financial privacy, which is one of the most badass parts of Monero. Is even if you have no idea how it technically works, you're still going to gain privacy. You don't have to jump through any extra hoops. So definitely high time for people to explore Monero, see how it fits into their toolkit, and start to figure out how to achieve financial privacy again in the wake of this craziness.
Governments recognize that these tools are being used to escape their grasp and crack down on them in various ways. You should just expect that. And maybe also to bring it back here, recognize that we need to fight every step of the way. And the current fight is Samourai Wallet and Whirlpool. And so let's definitely devote a lot of our attention to this particular current issue and move on from there. So this has been Seth for Privacy. Q&A will have their links to their excellent Twitter profiles and their websites. And of course, they both work for Foundation Devices, which is a Bitcoin hardware wallet company, which I know allows them to do a lot of things that they do. So consider supporting all three of these entities. And Q&A, thank you so much. Any final thoughts?
No, thanks for having us on, Gabriel. Great to have you back recording podcasts again. Was very thankful to get the invite. And just urge people, keep your ears to the ground about developments on this case, get involved and support wherever you can.
Yeah, I just want to echo that and say thank you for having us on. It's so important to continue talking through this stuff and be sure that people understand not only what the case is, how absurd it is, but also how Samourai worked and how it should not be under fire in any way now. So I'm grateful for that opportunity. Yeah, just keep doing what you can. We each have a platform, whether that's just a group chat with friends, a group chat with family, or whether that's a large Twitter profile or Instagram, whatever reach you have, you who's listening to this, use that reach to get the word out on what's happening here. Let's make sure that democracy does not die in darkness, that freedom and privacy do not die in darkness, but that we do everything we can to raise awareness for what's going on right now and rally as many people as possible behind this cause.
Free Samourai.